Okay, we are on day 95 of 100 days of visibility. I'm finally thawing. I'm excited. I had a problem here where the heater broke down 2 nights ago, and the weather's been freezing. And just within the last hour, got the heater fixed, so it's above freezing in the house. It's great. I can take off 2 of my sweaters. So, um, I've been wrestling with a kind of sort of messiness in my mind where like the there we go. Kind of messiness in my mind about like finding finding my body. Is a simple way to put it. I mean, it seems kind of strange. Well, I mean, here's the body, so like there, I succeeded in finding it, right? But particularly if you've been following what I've been talking about for any length of time, you may notice that there's a theme of tracking when we're living mentally hallucinated worlds versus when we're in the world, when we're in the world that our bodies are in. I'll sometimes reference a commonality of a kind of hypopsychosis, which is this, like psychosis, the actual clinical version of psychosis, like schizophrenia, is living in a world that is different than the one your body is in. There's a mild version of that that is incredibly widespread. It's normalized. I wouldn't say it's normal exactly, except that normal means lots of people do it, as opposed to it is well fitted to what is real. So, for the most part, most of the work that the foundation that a lot of the work that I do is based on returning to the sensations of the body, being present to this, and having sort of a check of, is this grounded in reality? Recognizing it's not so much the body exactly, it's more like the ground of truth, and the body is the sense organ for reality. It's the sense organ for the truth of what is. So grounding here, feeling these sensations, feeling my feet, feeling my breath, and tracking whether my thinking, when I choose to use it, roots back in physicality. These are really central themes. But over the last day or so, I've been having a lot of difficulty, probably related to the fact that it was so cold. It got really cold, and that created a sense of threat in my body. A sense of, I have to huddle, I have to focus, and I was getting tired. A lot of the energy that I felt in my body was getting routed into my mind. If I remember right, that was the focus of yesterday's video. I was talking about, oh yeah, it was 2 days ago. I think yesterday I was trying to cram in something about the higher self. So there's this kind of agitation at a raw physical level, and because of how I'm set up, because of the habit groups I've built in myself, when I get more energy in my body than I'm set to handle, or if there's a particular type of energy that I am trying to avoid experiencing, I have a habit of avoiding experiencing, the energy rapidly pipes into my mind and it revs my mind. Now, this creates a problem in that, like, one of the first things the mind does is create a fiction. This is how it works. Like, imagine a sphere. Really, where's the sphere? How do you imagine it? Where does it appear? Recently I was looking through some videos on Disneyland because I used to live near Disneyland, and my partner at the time and I used to go up there. We had an annual pass, and we would visit there many times. When you understand that statement, what does your mind create? Unless you're at Disneyland, and I think it's closed right now, so can't really be at Disneyland. The chances are very good that you have to create a fantasy world and imagine what I'm talking about. Nothing wrong with that, but most of the time we don't notice. We do it so fast, it's just part of our lived experience. And earlier today, um, one of my teachers, Perry Chase, mentioned, your mind is not your friend. Think of it like an evil AI that's trying to trap you. I honestly don't know if she knows how good the metaphor is. A lot of the threats that um, like I used to surround myself with people in the Bay Area around San Francisco who were enormously concerned about human extinction from making artificial intelligence that becomes smarter than humans. The logic is very good, and um, they, they, there's a piece of the logic that they're missing, which is, oh, one of the cans are heating up enough to pop. There's a piece of logic that's missing, which is that if their reasoning is correct, then there's already an AI in the sense that they're talking about running inside of people and inside of culture. And what we're encountering as the culture wars is actually a manifestation of an awakening AI. So if you don't account for that in what you're doing, then you're just going to get swept up in these forces. It's just in order to get around that, you have to view yourself as outside of it, which is exactly the error that produces the thinking about AI in the first place. But this is like a very fast forward of of an objection that I could give a lot more clearly if I were making that the focus of this video. But the in reflecting on this, okay, it's not so much condemning the mind. Perry might be like, it's a tool. It's like a dog. Like, you use it, but don't let it control anything. Like, okay. There's for me, it's not a matter of condemning the mind, but of recognizing that, like, I'm calling it evil AI is kind of a funny term, but like unfriendly. Having an unfriendly AI, an AI that isn't focused on welfare, but is instead focused on completing its task, completing its directive. It runs and it'll create these fantasy worlds. And then one of the things that's so powerful about the mind is its ability to figure out how anything that it encounters either doesn't matter or can be incorporated into the world that it's focused on building. It's a fantastic power. This is what allows us to do sense extension. The fact that we can think about the solar system. My body's physical senses cannot experience the solar system. It is too big. Same thing with atomic theory. That is way too small. It's way too refined. We have to use our minds to extend our senses. But most people in our modern world don't extend the senses skillfully using the mind. Instead, the mind becomes a tool for manufactured worlds. And those worlds, they sort of, it's almost like opening up portals, and that they're using our body energy in order to hold them open. So, and my mind is no exception. I've come to have enough clarity to recognize, oh, this is what's happening. And I can use like magical fantasy language, and a part of me enjoys doing that, but it's a mechanical process. The same thing that makes some people go psychotic in the literal sense, in the clinical sense of psychosis. A minor version of that is ubiquitous. It's almost everywhere. But it's kind of hard to miss. You just sort of look at what happened in 2020. Right? So I noticed this kind of revving chaos happening in my mind, and often the solution is very simple. You can just remember the stillness, experientially, not as a thought, but as a hear. That does very well. Most of the time that just does beautifully, does exactly what it needs to. It clarifies me and sort of anchors me back in truth. But sometimes that's not accessible. sometimes I feel like my mind traps me like an evil AI. Like I can know, I can remember mentally that grounding in stillness is the thing to do. Okay. If you're sensitive, if you're tracking subtle senses, and you can feel the difference between and and so just being able to feel the actual still difference, this helps me. And getting those clear contrasts is a huge amount of what I'm about, being able to experience these very, very subtle but very, very clear distinctions, very important distinctions. This, not that. So when I get trapped and I can only access the thoughts, and even when I try to, okay, let me actually do this. It's like doing it like that. It's like it's just too much energy. It's too much buzzing. The mind is pushing too hard. Feel the stomach. Feel the organs. The organs are soft. They're soft, sort of like squishy tissue, and it's wet. And it's, boy, like all the wet stuff in this house is really cold. And I wonder when the heater's going to get breath, breath. Remember the breath, the way the breath intertwines with the plants. No, no. Right. So that noise of the mind, if I try to fight it, it's actually feeding right into the evil AI's prisoner program. And in an important sense, the main tool I have for dealing with that is not getting there. I try to avoid revving my mind that much, getting that revved and that stimulated in the body, having that combination locking me in. Because it's a very unpleasant space to be in, and most of the time all I can do is sort of wait. But there is a trick that I can't use mechanically. Any trick I use mechanically gets incorporated into the mind, into the evil AI. And then it stops working because it gets incorporated into the trap itself. So this is not an idea. I'm going to have presented as an idea, but the part that is useful is not the idea of it. The idea points at something, and the idea is to attend to the something. So the something is, when I'm, well, the short version is, I'm going to see this in the title of this video, I'm talking about wordlessness. The shorthand is, can I focus on where language isn't? You know, what's special about language? Well, when I'm talking about the mind, I believe, this is not pivotal to my theories or views, but in practice I find this model helpful. I believe I am referring to the left hemisphere of the brain. And this is courtesy of Ian McGilchrist. Ian McGilchrist points out this model of the hemispheres of the brain that's not about, the left does logic and the right does creativity and art. It's not about topics. Both brains are involved, both sides of the brain are involved in all topics across the board. The difference is in how. The left brain is pulling things out of context, examining them, and building a model of them. It's looking at the details, and it tends to be goal-oriented. There tends to be a sense of achieve this result. Here are the problem states, figure it out. It's a very solvey process that goes on. And the left brain, interestingly enough, is also responsible for rationalization. So fascinating experiments with that. I don't want to go into that right now. It's one of the parts that tickles me, so it comes up easily for me. The right hemisphere of the brain is responsible for contextualization and relationship. Noticing the reality and interwovenness. And so our capacity to do things like you look across the room and you pick out the things that are blue, bam, 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 bam. Those are the things that are blue. And then you can look at the candle. I have a candle over here that's blue, and examine that candle. And well, here, let's grab it. Okay, so examining, right, and then going, well, I'm like, if I wanted to carve a little like icon into the candle, then I could like angle here and then cut this groove across here, and then so that zooming in and isolating all of that is no longer with respect to my pants. It's not with respect to um, the temperature of the room. Even though it's relevant to the softness of the wax. So that isolation and that thingness, that's the left hemisphere. The right hemisphere, well, when the left gets overwhelmed or sort of shut down and the right becomes dominant, a lot of times we'll experience these as spiritual experiences. But you get glimpses of this when you look across a wide vista, looking across this huge expanse and struck with awe. What are you picking out? You could go, hey, look at those streaks of light right there. But the relevant thing there is not like the streaks of light are telling you this following fact about the environment. No, it's, you examine the streak of light so that you can see it, and then you recontextualize it. That's the trade-off of the left hand, the right giving a context, handing it to the left. The left picks out a detail and then hands the detail back to the right to recontextualize it. So why is all that relevant? Well, the mind as the left hemisphere highlights a really important neurological detail, which it suggests something that I find is true in experience. The suggestion comes from the fact that language output, our ability to speak, comes from Broca's area, which is on the left hemisphere, roughly around the left ear. So Broca's area, I mean, there's a symmetric part. If I understand right, the symmetric part on the right hemisphere deals with music. It's not the only place in the brain that deals with music, but this is one of the reasons why people who stutter, if they think of singing, can often skip right past. So just because singing goes through a different process. So the so having language output, specifically words, being in the left hemisphere, one thing that highlights is if I am producing words in order to orient to something, that means the left hemisphere is active and is actively engaged. That doesn't mean that if there are no words, the left hemisphere isn't engaged. Right? So the flip doesn't quite work. But this works well enough that it provides a really powerful experiential search term, which is, can I slow down and focus on the things that aren't language? If I can slow down and focus on the things that aren't language, something else arises, a holisticness and an embodiedness. I don't know how universal this is for people. I imagine focusing on the words will tend to disembody. So the bit about embodiment, one of the reasons for this going into the hemispheres, is that the body as an organic, holistic wholeness, calling it a thing is still left hemispheric, but as a wholeness, as a living entity, is a right hemisphere view. The body as lived is right hemispheric. The body as an anatomical object, as machine parts, is like I've got these bones with these like muscles set to move it and the tendons that link the things up and the skin to protect it. And I need to keep this machine functioning so that I can keep using it. That's a very left hemispheric view. The left hemisphere, in particular, because it is linked to the right side of the body, and the right hemisphere linked more to the left hemisphere tends to prioritize the right half of the body. But it tends to prioritize the right half of the body as a collection of tools in isolation for achieving goals in its simulated representation of reality. The right hemisphere, even though it's linked up primarily to the left half of the body, because it's focused on integration and context, sees the importance of the entire body. So experiencing the grounding in the body is a very clear sign of orienting to the right hemisphere's way of being. And the right hemisphere is much, much, much better at orienting to what context the left hemisphere makes sense for it to operate in. If the left tries to do that, it will create a hallucinated world in isolation of context and then do things that make sense in that world, ignore the rest of the context. And when input tries to come in, it will either explain why that information already is compatible with its world model, or it will ignore the information. This is immensely systematic. This is a huge part of why our world looks the way it does. The left hemisphere way of operating has dominated the westernized culture for, depending on how you want to count it, for about 400 years. Arguably, it started with, I think it's fair to say that the peak of its ascension was around the Enlightenment. There was a swing back with the Romantic era of the 19th century, but the Romantics were more like a push back against, and it didn't really dislodge the machinery of science and the coming of the Industrial Revolution, which are, like, science isn't strictly a left hemispheric thing, but the way science has evolved, and particularly the way it got turned to an industrial revolution, and the way that we, particularly the way that we have faith in this mysterious land that we call away. You throw garbage away, you put people away in prison, make problems go away. Where is away? The faith in a way requires believing that it is possible to cut reality into pieces and that the parts that you're not immediately connected to don't exist. It's a left hemispheric hallucination. So a lot of the trouble that we're running into as a species right now is because of the dominance of the left hemispheric way of viewing things, which is incoherent, shattered, fragmented, and hallucinatory, and is extremely good at defying information input. It can't learn that it is wrong. Its job is to figure out why it's right. So so what I think I've been finding very grounding. I've come to this several times, and I'm just returning to it today. It feels very relieving and very spacious to come back to this. And it actually brought me pause of, I still have a live stream to do. Like my mind reminding me of, oh, I've got this live stream to do. And it took me a while to find the emotional and energetic space from which it made sense for me to engage in this, because sort of like talking. But taking time to do things that have nothing to do with language. If it requires me to engage in language, just setting it aside. Now, technically, input of language is not a left hemispheric thing, but because of how my mind works, even reading tends to pour power into my mind, because I'll then read the ideas, and then the format of interfacing with the words makes it so that working with other words can be helpful, and adding words can be helpful for fleshing things out. Things like, oh, I don't think they should have phrased it this way. If they phrased it this way, it would have implied these things better. So, excuse me, that kind of engagement makes it so that it is hard for me to notice when I start adding words. So aiming for something like, first off, avoiding language. I spent a couple of hours just avoiding language, avoiding speaking it, ideally avoiding thinking it, which is a little tricky. There's a nuance to that. I'll touch on that in a moment. But like certainly not reading it, not writing. For heaven's sakes, not writing. I love writing and I'm very good at it, but it's that's as Broca's area as you can get, um, with the arguable exception of speaking. And yeah, so just tracking, well, what can I do that does not require language, and giving myself the opportunity to, if it comes up, feel the fears that arise from that. Particularly fear of boredom used to show up for me. What can I do? I have everything I do is language based. I could watch a video. No, watching a video is going to involve me listening to ideas. And when I listen to ideas expressed in language, well, that's the same thing. So um, what can I do? And this is where the spirit comes into play for me. It's not, now I could, in principle, for instance, look at pictures of geometry. But there's a very particular tension in my mind, a way that I can feel my body energy fueling my mind, that when I take language off the table, it becomes really clear that what I'm taking off the table is a very particular use of energy. It makes it a lot easier for me to track, feel viscerally where I am pouring energy into my mind. Identifying that lets me recognize, oh, learning, but a particular kind of learning, like learning that contains content, learning that contains ideas and information. Whether or not it has language in it, I can feel how that is the same thing. So puzzling out geometry, even though it's technically not language, even though it's spatial, the things that I would have to do to engage with geometry feel the same. So I don't do that. Looking for ease, looking for letting go of attention in my head, letting go of an intending, letting go of goal. Now, I'd already come up with a couple of activities that I can do if I really want to do something, but I'm in a no language space. One is practicing guitar. Another is practicing drawing. Another is exercise. So having those three on hand is helpful. Like exercise both in terms of doing some intense qigong, or I can go for a walk when it's sunny, or at least not pouring rain. And technically, I can go when it's raining, but it's not nearly as pleasant. I don't have good waterproof shoes that don't make my ankles hurt. So some practical limitations. But in practice, when I shift into this, a lot of the time I'll just stop and I'll just sit here. Because the choice to not engage language both brings me in touch with the spaciousness of the present moment and with the things that want to pull me away from it. And really just taking the time for me to notice it, to really feel all those little tugs, and to anchor myself in, right now is okay. It's very relieving, and it digests a lot. Particularly relieving in the head. One thing it really strikes me is this sense of how much energy my mind takes. I've mentioned a number of times here, I know I have a very powerful mind. I know that I have this gift. It's not, uh, there's certainly an element of pride to it, but there's also just a practical thing. It feels like I'm saying something like, yeah, I know I'm tall. I'm not, but it has that kind of quality. Yeah, I'm tall, whatever. Yeah, I'm strong. Yeah, I'm smart. It's like it's just a quality that I came with. I don't recall choosing it. Um, but I'm grateful for it. And that um, that quality, using the mind this way, requires a lot of energy. So stepping back and going, oh, well, what if I don't just blast energy through my mind all the time? Oh, I have more energy for other things. Like what? Huh, that's interesting. I normally solve that problem by asking my mind. And my mind isn't on right now. I mean, it is right now. It's revving pretty well. It's, it's at normal because I'm sort of averaging between shutting it off and engaging in this video. um, so the there was a piece I'd said I was going to go into in a minute. Right, right, the bit about internal language. So there's a step that I found that I could not do this morning. I had to take some time to orient to the no language in general before I could access this. There's this subtle thing I picked up from Michael Singer's book, The Untethered Soul. At first I sort of laughed and went, oh, this is like the auditory version of a visual thing I was taught as a kid. As time has gone on, I've recognized, oh, actually, the auditory thing is more powerful for me, at least right now. So notice the process of, like, I look at this, I see what it is, and then my mind says, this is a cup. Well, I knew it was a cup before my mind commented on it. So what's the commentary for? Likewise, looking outside, I say, oh, it's sunny. If I'm communicating to somebody else, hey, did you notice that it's sunny? That makes sense because the words are to communicate to another person. But when I'm just sitting there, and I look out, I see that it's sunny. What a beautiful day. Did I not know it was a beautiful day before I said the words? If so, how did I know to say the words? So there's this kind of, when taken on its own, it's like a kind of madness. I think Singer misses the point of why the mind does this. The mind basically can't see the beauty. So it has to translate the beauty into its own terms. It has to represent, it has to represent the beauty in its own terms. And having some words like, wow, that's beautiful, and having isolated snapshots of the image and the setting and remembering the fact of this is beautiful allows it to have a handle on the process. So it's like a computer creating a rendering of a 3D object. You can't actually put 3D objects in a computer, but you can tell a computer to make software copies of 3D objects. I think that's basically what the mind is doing. So noticing that and recognizing, well, that's very important if I need my mind to represent beauty, or if I need my mind to solve some problem that I might ask of it now or later, related to observing the fact that it's sunny. But if that's not the case, then what is that for? And this goes back to a point that I'll, I imagine I will say a lot more of because the following point is related also to the boundaries I'm drawing for my space, such as my Facebook profile. Only intent matters. the energy behind what causes something to happen matters more than the content of what's happening. This is not obvious for minds that are fixated on the level of form and manifestation, and such minds tend to object. They'll tend to object with trivial examples like, oh yeah, if a rock is falling on your head and it's like a boulder is going to fall on your head, it doesn't matter what the intent was that resulted in the boulder falling, you need to move. Like, yeah, sure. Physical emergencies are cases where the manifestation layer is the thing that you need to address. But almost all people, almost at all times, are not in situations like that. So it's just not, like these emergency situations just are vastly more rare than we talk about. Or sorry, it's vastly more rare than would need to be true in order for us to fixate entirely on the level of manifestation. This is on par with you can't talk to a starving man about God. You have to feed him first. That makes sense. Some basic physiological things can provide limitations, but very few things we encounter are quite that extreme. And I say we, I don't mean all humans. I certainly mean me and most of the people who are likely to ever watch this video. So it's just not, it's not the level to be concerned about. So I mention that because if I don't know the intent of the rendering that my mind is doing, then I don't know what the effect is of letting it do so. I don't know what program is running behind the, oh, it's sunny, it's so beautiful. I wonder if I should go for a walk. Like, what's all that about? What's talking? Why? If I ask those questions verbally, I'm feeding into whatever process I'm not seeing. But the important part is actually for me to see it. If I can't see it, the chances are quite good that it's actually more of service to unplug it. So the move for avoiding language inside is for me to just notice, for instance, I know it's sunny before I say the words even in my head. So let me focus on the knowing and not the words. Notice the gap between them inside and focus on the knowing. Oh, I'm so bored. Oh, those were interesting words.